Hello. Before we get started, I want to go over some housekeeping items. This webinar is scheduled for 45 minutes plus 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. We want this webinar to be interactive, so we encourage your participation. To participate, please enter your questions using the Q&A tab located in your Zoom console. If we're unable to answer your questions during today's webinar, we'll follow up by email. Lastly, I want to remind everyone that a recording of this live webcast and a copy of the PowerPoint slides will be emailed to all the registrants. So thank you for joining us. I'd like to welcome you, everybody, to today's webinar, Manage Secure Access Work from Home and BYOD Programs with a Single Platform. And I'd like to introduce our speakers. Laura Ellis is the Vice President of Products for Secure Access, and Russ Miller is the Chief Technology Officer for MetaAccess. So welcome, Laura. Welcome, Russ.
Thank
you. And hello, everyone. We're pleased that you've joined us to learn more about protecting your users, devices, and secure access, particularly in this time of both working and accessing information from so many different locations. It's always been a challenge, and even more so in 2020. I will go over the business requirements and the best practices that we have learned in our years of experience in this field, and then Russ will review with you the OPSWAT MetaAccess solution, including a quick demo. And last, I'll go over some case studies so that you can see how your peers have been able to implement the best practices we discussed. While this is a webinar where it's difficult to be interactive, we will have a few questions throughout, questions that we hope will be of interest to share amongst all of you. So please type in your answers in the Q&A panel that Doug just mentioned, and he will then read these answers to the group. Of course, also please ask your own questions at any time throughout. We'll monitor and we'll answer live if we can, or email the responses after the session. So let's talk about 2020's toughest security concerns. There are many articles on this topic, and I'm sure that you have probably read some interesting analysis and stats that are available. Here are a couple that should be of interest to you. First is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, alert. This is one of their most recent alerts on top vulnerabilities, the top 10. And of the top 10, it mostly falls into the three categories that you see listed here: unpatched virtual private network vulnerabilities, and here this alert is listing the specific vendors that currently do have issues. Next, the hasty deployment of Microsoft Office 365. We all had to move so quickly back in March. Now that we know that many of us may always keep some component of work from home, it's time to review those security policies that were so quickly implemented, not only for Office 365, but across the board. And here's a way to get started, to check out the vulnerabilities that are there now. Last is increased ransomware attacks, and it's no surprise that that has occurred. I'm sure you've seen it in the news as well. But with the need for employee training, there's also the need for assurance that the laptop or whatever device is being used at home is compliant and has secure access to the network. And that will cut down on these attacks, as well as checking out the vulnerabilities mentioned here. The next thing that I have for you is a Gartner report that was done on as a survey for security auditors. So in 2020, what are their top concerns? And here's what we see as the top three. First, data governance. 80% of top executives realize how critical this is, not only to ensure that the data is protected, but that the right controls are in place for access to that data. Second is third-party ecosystems. And over 50% of the executives who replied recognize that there is increasing dependence upon third parties who often do have a need for access. These relationships are getting more complex, making it more important to focus on the secure access capabilities that you have. And last is cyber vulnerabilities. As cyber criminals just continue to operate with highly sophisticated variety of low-cost and readily available hacking tools, making it difficult for all of us to keep up to this ever-increasing threat. And with that, what are your top concerns? This would be a good time to pause and let me hear from you. If you could put into the Q&A, what are the things that are concerning you the most? And Doug will take just a moment here as you're typing these in, and then Doug will share your answers back with the whole team.
So we are getting some responses. Weak work from home security is one. NAC complexity and holistic trust model. Another is I'm hearing growing concerns about sprawling asset management or lack of it, especially with moving to the cloud. And that's what we have so far.
That's very good. Those are all valid, and I can see why they would be top concerns for you all. It's good to hear that. And just to keep the conversation going, we now have a quick cybersecurity quiz. I have 4 questions for you, and I'd love to see how many of you come up with good answers. Again, the references for these answers, just as in the reports before, are in the notes so that when you do receive this presentation after the webinar, you can go to the notes section and find the articles and reports referenced there. So first question, what are some of the top issues that are surrounding security management? The management of the security process in your organizations. What are some of the top issues that you hear?
Okay, I see a response. How to simplify complexity. Here's another one, too many solutions. A couple more came in. Training for the team and staying current.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And here are some answers from a Forbes article that was done, aptly named Simple is the Goal, because some of the key things are around complexity, which I think one of you mentioned already. There are just too many point products to control. 77% of those who participated said that. And not only are there too many products, but the policies themselves are too complex to manage. And last, despite the increasing number of products and policies, detecting threats overall is still too difficult. The attackers are still getting past our defenses. So that's a valid, definite concern that we need to manage. And what are some of the common types of security breaches? There's many in the marketplace. Certainly we read about ransomware almost every day. What other common types of security breaches are you concerned about, and do you hear about the most?
So we're getting a few answers here. Phishing, DDoS, unauthorized devices getting on the network, work from home exposures, just a few.
Okay, yeah, that's fantastic, and keep them coming, but you certainly are covering some of the most common ones that we do see. So what I have here from this report is man-in-the-middle attacks, where you have someone who inserts themselves in the middle of some conversation, and the people on either side both believe that man-in-the-middle is a secure and valid response when it is not. So that's one common attack. Another is denial of service or distributed denial of service, where the attacker is flooding the internet so that your valid responses can't get through. And yes, phishing, spear phishing, all leading to ransomware, those are very common as well. Here's another question. What is the average number of security solutions in an organization? We have all sizes of organizations, so this is tough. But one resource here did come up with a number of what they feel is the average if you were to take all those organizations together. And this could range a wide number. What number do you think is the one that came up as the average?
All right, we have quite a few entries here. 3, 10, 50, 125, 30, 22, 62. There's a few more responses, but I'll stop there.
You've given a great range. No one quite hit it, but several of you got very close. 62 would be the closest. This survey said 75. And clearly this number can vary significantly. So all those answers are correct. We are working with a credit union now, both on simplifying, enhancing their portfolio. They have 23 solutions. So it can vary widely, but one thing is for certain, it's rarely one. And then what percent of the organizations or companies have had a security breach because of work from home? That's the last question that we have in the survey. And we've all heard many articles about this happening. How many organizations do you think have actually had this happen?
Again, quite a few responses that range anywhere from 5% to 80%, 23%, 36, 48, 56, 55.
Okay.
Looks like every number.
Wow, that's great. And the 23 is probably the closest to what the survey said. The survey came back at 20%. And so as you can see, another concern and good for us all to be aware. So we know the issues, the complexity is increasing, and so are the number of breaches. How can we address them? Let me review a few of the approaches that we've learned are the best practices. First is to define and disseminate security policy with automated awareness. Yes, we all know education is paramount. However, there is always potential for human error. The more you can automate remediation, the better off you are. Second is having multiple forms of security protection. What is commonly known as the defense in depth strategy has long time been the standard in security and still is the required approach. However, with this defense in depth does come more and more the requirement to consolidate to reduce the overall complexity. Another common best practice is to have continuous scans with the automated incident response and remediation. It's not enough to just check at the door. There needs to be continuous checks with the ability for automated, if possible, and if not, self-remediation to get as close as possible to just having this occur at the moment that there is a possible incident. Next would be enforcing least privilege. This has often been one of the key tenets of a good security practice, and just now is more and more important. With work from home, we do not want attackers to have ability to get on our network and have east-west travel. So having this least privilege in place is important. And last is role-based access control, something that is important to leverage across the board in many different manners. And similar to the previous practice, it's using tools to ensure that you're able to limit access to the network, data, and applications by role. Now that we have a good feel for some of the issues and the best practices to address them, let me share with you a little about how OPSWAT can help. What we're here to talk about today is a solution called MetaAccess within OPSWAT. And the MetaAccess platform is a approach with ability to address many of the concerns and build upon the best practices. The compliance checks with advanced endpoint compliance go well beyond simple antivirus and OS level checks. This platform also has specialized solutions such as the ability to integrate with virtual desktop infrastructure and direct connection into tools such as Salesforce. So then, once you know the device is indeed compliant, MetaAccess can then ensure secure access, either remotely or on-prem, to give you the security that you need in accessing network, accessing data, and accessing applications. Let me build on this a little bit further with a more detailed diagram. In this first step, you can see that you can have a compliance check for your managed and your unmanaged devices. And as you can see, there's a lot here. There are 7 different categories, and it is indeed a deep compliance check, enabling near zero-day detection of anti-malware, providing vulnerability and patch management, and protecting against concerns that have grown in 2020 with things such as keylogger and screen capture. Russ will be going into more details on this and the rest of this information on this diagram very, very soon. The next step is to ensure secure access, and MetaAccess provides cloud access protection through SAML, IDP integration, and software-defined perimeter, an emerging technology for zero trust network access. All of this is available in one agent and with one Opswat client, managed from one dashboard. So that's an important point here, is we are making this in a simpler, more automated fashion for you. The last portion of this MetaAccess platform is network access control. This provides you full on-premise protection and actually would integrate into your network at either layer 2 or layer 3. We have the ability with the MetaAccess NAC to pretty much fit into most networks environment without any upgrade or changes. We act as your radius server. If you use 802.1x protocol, we take advantage of it, but if you don't, that's completely fine. And this enables you not only to manage your devices that we've discussed already, managed and unmanaged, but also your IoT or browserless devices, ensuring that they all are assigned to the proper place on the network and blocking unauthorized access while ensuring compliance. NAC is not available on the same client today. However, it is integrated with MetaAccess for these deep compliance checks that it can bring to the table, and operates with STP as well. With that said, our focus today is going to be on MetaAccess and STP, as these are the parts of the portfolio that are so important in addressing the challenges brought on in this year of 2020. With that said, let me turn it over to Russ Miller for explanations on how this works, the value it can bring, and he'll also provide a short demo. Russ? Russ, are you on mute?
Do you hear me now?
Sure can.
Okay.
Yes.
So first, let's talk about advanced endpoint compliance, which is the kind of section of the diagram Laura was just covering that was on the left, and talk about how and why MetaAccess is going to help you meet all of these needs that are important in terms of things like compliance and security. So first and foremost, it has to be on a lot of your minds, and a responsibility that a lot of you own is making sure your organization is meeting regulatory requirements, and of course the fines that might come along with it. And part of that is checking security on devices. And MetaAccess can do this in a very deep and broad fashion. And this is, one tool that in a combined fashion can do a deep set of compliance checks, as well as things like manage third-party applications, block those that maybe you don't want to be run or used, that are perhaps known to cause issues or be non-compliant, and also potentially remove unwanted applications and those that may have vulnerabilities, and also help with patch management. And ultimately, of course, for any application like this that ultimately could involve end users, and making sure they're self-helping and staying compliant and secure, the importance is a positive user experience. It doesn't interrupt their work any more than necessary. And I'll give you a taste of that as we go through the demo here in terms of how users are guided to self-remediate. So here, we'll focus on each of those areas a little deeper, starting with compliance. So in terms of compliance, MetaAccess ensures that those security applications, whether it's malware, AV, or other applications that might be required to be running on the endpoint to ensure it is secure, are active and up to date and running, as well as making sure that maybe the device has the removable media or the hard drive encrypted, making sure password protection is turned on, helping again, as mentioned, to remove and make sure software is updated, and assisting with all those common security regulations that you're required to comply with. And there are thousands of security products that MetaAccess can ensure are installed, active, and running. So in terms of security and focusing on that, one of the significant advantages that MetaAccess brings is a way to take, for example, a certain file and run it through multiple malware engines simultaneously and ultimately deliver near zero-day detection by leveraging an engine that scans and shares data across different users that are collecting sort of a crowdsourced ability to find malware in a smarter way than a single malware engine can do. MetaAccess can also block and scan portable media content in case there might be some vulnerabilities on the content, or maybe you just have a compliance requirement not to allow them at all. And also, MetaAccess recently has introduced an anti-keylogger capability, as well as screen capture protection. In terms of that multi-scanning capability of scanning with multiple engines, MetaAccess includes 20 plus anti-malware engines. So let's focus on vulnerabilities. MetaAccess can help in terms of detecting vulnerabilities, and this includes any of the CVEs or the common vulnerability exposures that are in the common database, and help prioritize them. So not just detect them, but prioritize them. And MetaAccess goes beyond just the common CVE information and the scores that come with that. It actually generates its own scores based on millions of devices that the Opswat client runs on, where we collect information, correlate it, and come up with our own score to incorporate years of experience with vulnerabilities and dealing with them from the field. So ultimately, there's over 5,000 third-party apps that MetaAccess can detect the CVEs from, and ultimately using the next section that we'll talk about, which is access control. So, in terms of compliance or security or vulnerabilities, ultimately, part of what we're going to talk about and focus on next is you don't want these devices that may have these vulnerabilities or security issues accessing applications or network resources if they're compromised. And we'll talk about a couple of techniques that MetaAccess offers to protect applications and resources. So the endpoints and the secure access, endpoint protection and secure access all in one platform is a major focus of what we're explaining here today, and you'll see that in the demo. So let's focus on the secure access now. And maybe let's jump back with this question, kind of give you a second to think about the question. What are the sources of vulnerabilities for work from home? And this, I know some of you answered that this was one of the common breaches or areas of risk that when Laura asked earlier. So let's go ahead and look at some of those in one by one here. So opening additional applications for remote access. So certainly as more workers were forced to lock down and work from home, applications that wouldn't have maybe traditionally been accessible outside the perimeter were opened up for remote access. And certainly that put additional data at risk. And not just then additional applications, but because more users were required to be working from home, that took a lot of those workers that were inside the perimeter, moved them outside, and required VPN for them to access it. So the perimeter sort of expanded whether anybody wanted it to or not, just because so many users were now outside of that traditional perimeter. One thing that probably a lot of you thought about as these workers started working from home more is that their home Wi-Fi is not encrypted or secure. So, you know, unlike at the office where they could use a secure Wi-Fi connection or a wired connection, now suddenly they're at home on a you know, home brand sort of router and probably using an open network that's not secure. And so that's another big vulnerability that increased here recently. So many of you may be lamenting that as these users have been migrating outside of the traditional perimeter, you've lost your visibility into the applications they're accessing. You know, not just those that are on premise that, you know, maybe because they started working from home due to lockdowns or whatnot, but even this has been a long-term trend where with cloud access to things like Office 365, Box, or Salesforce, you had already potentially started to lose both control and visibility into what they were accessing from home or the coffee shop. So this has certainly been a long-term trend. Again, another example that was greatly sped up here in the last 6 to 9 months with the COVID virus, in that many organizations didn't have enough devices to share for all their employees and enforced the use of personal devices. And certainly BYOD has been a trend, and in making sure those personal devices are compliant and secure is it's something that's going to be with us going forward. There's clearly going to be that continued use of personal devices, whether they're laptops or phones or tablets. And then a very important area of compliance is that sensitive data, and ensuring that no matter where the user is and how they're accessing it, that it's encrypted and otherwise kept secure, because it's not going to matter to the auditor when they come and they find out the data has been leaked, how it got leaked. It's that it got leaked. So, you know, making sure that, for example, if it's transitioning onto a personal laptop, that hard drive is encrypted, or, you know, maybe they're using VDI or other technology to access it. And so making sure that maybe they can't do a screen capture or they don't have somebody with a keylogger, all of that factors in as one of those vulnerabilities that's heightened by using a personal device, maybe working from home. So ultimately, you know, summing all this up, all of these things represent challenges that really require a new approach to permitting use of personal devices or just working outside of the traditional perimeter. So let's talk about that new approach. So there's really two approaches that we offer that help cover all of those challenges in combination. First being software-defined perimeter, SDP. Some of you, I'm sure, have started reading more and more about that recently. It's started to become a topic with Gartner and others, Forrester as well. And then another approach that Opswat has offered for a while, using SAML IDP to control access. You know, in both of these cases, we're limiting access until the device is compliant, secure, and the user has been authorized. So in terms of accessing applications remotely, these new approaches need to enable applications that traditionally would only be available on-prem. So we'll talk about that. You know, so some examples might be SSHing into a terminal on a Linux box that maybe needs remote access, or a Windows file share, sort of a legacy file share, database connection for a two-tier application. There's all these sorts of legacy use cases that are still in place that now need to be accessed remotely. And certainly they could use a VPN to do that, but VPNs are vulnerable. There's a lot of pre-auth type of attacks. There was one recently, a hospital in Germany, that resulted in potentially a death of a patient, you know, that was indirectly related to a VPN pre-auth attack where ransomware got in and shut down the hospital. And part of this overall solution then to make sure that these remote accesses are safe is to take a zero trust approach and darken the network connections. We'll talk about that in a second in a much more concrete fashion, but basically hiding the network connections from potential attack. In terms of protecting internal resources, there's more and more need for that in a broader sense, especially again with COVID going on. Developers and others that maybe wouldn't have worked remotely need access to things like their code and and IP related things that absolutely need to be protected. QA labs and that sort of thing are another driving factor for a need for a new approach. And ultimately, we're talking about a new perimeter and a way to extend control and visibility out from the device, from the end user's device, and create a perimeter of one all the way back into either internal services, again, those traditional sorts of legacy applications potentially, or up to the cloud to SaaS-based applications. So let's talk a little bit deeper about software-defined perimeter and how it works and how it's better than the alternative approaches that have been used traditionally. So here we have a diagram that shows the traditional approach with the firewall VPN. So down on the bottom right, some applications on the far right that the user wants to access. He or she is able to access those applications through the firewall VPN, and that firewall VPN is sitting on the public internet and available for anyone to try those pre-auth attacks or other, potentially even remote code executions. And so what we need is that new approach. And in number 2, we introduce, instead of that firewall VPN, an access gateway. That access gateway is in a deny all state. It's basically a dynamic firewall that's going to drop any traffic unless it's known to be destined for those applications and already vetted. So in number 3, we introduce a trust broker, or sometimes we refer to it as the controller. It acts as the brains and a bit of an intermediary between the client and the access gateway. It's going to go check our policies, talk to the identity access management system to make sure that the user is authorized. It comes with a certificate authority and PKI infrastructure that helps with certificate management and public-private key management and all of that really increases the level of security above and beyond a traditional VPN. So number 4 here, we have the client talking to the trust broker before it's able to access the application. So the conversation between the client and the trust broker makes sure that the client is secure and compliant. So the Opswat client is running on that device, continuously checking to make sure that the device is up to your standards in terms of security and compliance, and sharing that information to the trust broker. So if the client attempts to use an application, or even during the conversation with an application, if it's found to be non-compliant, the device will be blocked from the applications. So number 5, ultimately after the client has been vetted, both for security and compliance, the device is allowed to connect, and that line by number 5 there represents a mutually authenticated TLS connection where it's got the certificate pinned back to our own CA and public-private keys that are generated on demand, and just a much more secure way to avoid those sorts of attacks like Laura mentioned earlier, especially the man-in-the-middle attacks. So, in summary, that access gateway is going to be there to very solidly protect from any of those sorts of threats that we talked about earlier. So now let's shift to the other approach. As I mentioned, there's 2, the SDP approach and the SAML or IDP method. So this is more about protecting cloud resources, cloud services, such as Office 365, Box, GitHub. We'll talk in a second about Salesforce. And this approach can use any SAML 2.0 IDP, common ones being Okta, Centrify. Maybe you have an on-premise Active Directory and you'd want to do that through ADFS, or maybe you've moved already to Azure AD, and we can work with that as well. So, basically it protects the SaaS service by stepping through a flow that I'll show you here in a second. But again, the main point here is that it's going to leverage your policies to make sure that the device is compliant before it connects. So here is what I was alluding to in terms of the flow. Here on the left, we have the client device or the user's device that's going to attempt to access an application. And to do that, it's going to go through, it's acting as the service provider for the application is acting as the service provider to the user. And that application is going to pass on the attempted login to the identity provider. The identity provider in turn will defer to MetaAccess. So that, like I mentioned with SDP, the Opswat client is on that endpoint, and it's continuously updating MetaAccess as to the state of compliance and security of the endpoint. If when the IDP defers to MetaAccess, it says that the device is compliant, we'll see the green sort of good to go message represented here in green. Else, if there's a compliance or security issue, it's going to show the remediation page. And I'll show you an example of those here in a minute. So real quickly, there are a couple of other solutions that we offer for secure access. The first one being a Salesforce App Exchange application, and the second one, approach for using VMware Horizon integration to protect VDI sessions. So yeah, just at a glance here, this is an App Exchange app that you can get access to. It's publicly available in the cloud and the catalog at Salesforce, and it's going to accomplish the same thing as what we talked about before, but it's integrated tightly to Salesforce to give a better experience for people accessing Salesforce and getting them blocked if they're not compliant. And then similarly, in this case with VMware, the device, the endpoint is talking to MetaAccess continuously, sharing the security and compliance posture. And when you attempt to talk to VMware to get access, it'll defer to MetaAccess. And based on whether MetaAccess finds you compliant or not, the VDI session will either be permitted or denied. And similarly, the user will either be guided to self-remediate or just naturally will get access to the application without interruption. One more quick mention, we do have a document that talks about how MetaAccess helps with these various compliance regulations like HIPAA, PCI, SOX, GDPR. Not going to go into detail here, but I encourage you to go out on our website and search for that document, how to achieve regulatory compliance and certification with MetaAccess. So now, for something completely different, let's go do a quick demo. So here we are looking at the dashboard within the MetaAccess application. You can see there's a lot of detail here that helps you at a heads up sort of fashion. I can drill in on things like the endpoints that maybe aren't compliant. And when I do that, I would be taken to the device information within MetaAccess. And here I just have a couple of example devices for point of the demonstration. In particular, a desktop Windows machine that is compliant and an Android phone that's not. And again, as an end user on that desktop, I would have the Opswat client installed. There's some simple instructions and guidance on how to get that pushed out onto those devices. And there's lots of information available here for you as the administrator about the state of the device, including like the malware that it's anti-malware it's running and so forth, what vulnerabilities are on it, the state of it. So I mentioned earlier that if the device is compliant, the user would get the good to go sort of message. I mean, they really aren't even bothered by this unless they were in a self-remediation state and they cleared it up. But if for a device that's not compliant, then So for example, this Android phone, when they become non-compliant, they will get a message, when they try to access an application or they find their device switching to a non-compliant state, that will tell them that it's not compliant and why. So, in this case, what went wrong? The device is running an outdated version of the operating system. What's the impact? Why does it matter? Obviously, I think you all understand we should all be running the latest version of operating systems these days. And then ultimately, how do I fix it? In this case, I would upgrade. So that's the device inventory. Let's focus, and then that's obviously a big part of the advanced endpoint compliance, is those are the devices that are going to be checked. In terms of the secure access, this is where the applications are defined. So in terms of applications a user would be allowed access to or blocked, here's where they're defined. And in terms of adding them, we again get these two choices, either using SDP to protect them or an IDP approach. And if we choose the SDP as an example, we'll walk through a nice little wizard here that we put in the type of application. Is it a web app, SSH, RDP, other? We can use things like a range of IPs and almost treat it like a VPN in creating access to a subnet, range of ports, very flexible. After we give the basics of the application, we'd indicate which users are allowed access and ultimately choose between either an on-premise gateway. So back to that diagram where I talked about the application gateway, you can either use one on-premise or we host an option for you in the cloud to make it even easier. So just, as an example here, you can see I have some different applications set up. Some of them would be managed by the IDP approach, some of them better managed by SDP. So also then just a quick tour of some of the other aspects of MetaAccess. Here's a list of the CVEs that are on the devices that I happen to have in the system. You can see that it ranks them and tells the severity, and it would be, based on the severity, you could set policy as to whether a device would be blocked or allowed access, and also given information about how to resolve it by upgrading or patching. Here's the policies. So obviously a very important part of ensuring automatically that devices are compliant. So here's the vulnerability and patch management configuration, device compliance. This is where you would make sure that the anti-malware is, whichever one you want is installed and running and up to date. Things like ensuring encryption, making sure that users are authenticating, and you can see there's just quite a long list of capabilities here to apply in ensuring compliance. And you can also see that we support both mobile devices, laptops, desktops, and Linux as well. So quite a few options here under the policies. And a big part of this also is some visibility. So there's reports, and there's under the applications, you get visibility into activities of users that are using those applications. So lots and lots of detail to help you protect your organization, stay compliant and secure. And at this point, that'll conclude the demo. So Laura, I'll pass the ball back to you.
Thank you, Russ. And thank you for sharing the demo. I felt that really helped bring to life some of the capabilities in this solution. What I'd like to do now is share with you all a few of the case studies, how other customers of OPSWAT have been able to integrate this solution in order to gain some of the best practices we talked about at the beginning. And first, let me talk about a large global bank that is headquartered in Germany. And this bank has actually been a customer of OPSWAT for a long time. They have been able to see the value of using MetaAccess to simplify, strengthen, and automate the remediation of their endpoint compliance checks. So it's something they've been using for a while. And then with the sudden shift to work from home, it was very easy for them to implement MetaAccess for their work from home employees, enabling them to access sensitive applications which never before had been allowed off-prem. They had to do it now, and they were able to do so in a secure manner. So they had a large expansion of the MetaAccess solution in March. Here's another example, and this one is a United States University campus. It's actually a small liberal arts college located in Southern California, and they had been a customer for a long time of the Network Access Control, or NAC solution. This was required to secure all the devices that their students could bring onto campus. And then this year, they had the same level of security need for their faculties and staff working from home. And again, they were able to quickly implement software-defined perimeter. That was their solution they chose to ensure that the faculty and staff were able to work from home without potential for these common attacks, such as DDoS and man-in-the-middle, and help prevent phishing, some of the others that we talked about at the beginning. They were able to implement this very quickly. The last example that I'll share with you is a large European call center. It's actually an outsourcing firm, and they work with many clients, but they actually won a contract from the government in the UK to do contact tracing for them. So obviously a critical application with need for speed. And they came to us with the request to be able to implement this solution in 3 days, both MetaAccess and the software-defined perimeter component to meet the government contract requirements. So in 3 days, they were able to get this implemented for 2,000 employees to work from home in what is obviously one that has much privacy concerns and much attention to ensure that it works correctly. This has gone well and is still in use today. Now that I've shared with you about the solution itself, I'd like to spend just a few minutes before we wrap up on OPSWAT as a company. I don't know how many of you have actually heard of OPSWAT prior to today, but we've been around since 2002 and got our start more in the OEM business, where we would actually provide software development kits of a lot of the kind of functionality that we've talked about today to other manufacturers to incorporate in their solution. That is still something we offer, and many large companies are using this OPSWAT technology that we've discussed under the covers, such as Cisco, HP Aruba, Pulse Secure, Palo Alto. There's much use of this type of capability from OPSWAT under the cover. OPSWAT has then, of course, has developed many solutions of our own, all in the cybersecurity area, with a focus on trust no file and trust no device, long before zero trust became a buzzword. In fact, we've got a strong reputation for protecting some of the world's most critical infrastructure, and we protect 98% of the United States nuclear power plants. So if we can protect those, hopefully you can be assured that we can protect your critical infrastructure as well, because every company does have that. You can see we have offices around the globe. Russ and I are speaking to you from Tampa Bay, although our headquarters are in San Francisco, and we have sales, R&D, support center, sales and marketing in 9 locations around the globe. I'd like to spend another minute on Opswat Academy. One of the things that was mentioned at the beginning, and I think it was one of the answers we received, was needing to get good training for cybersecurity professionals and for your users as well. And Opswat recognized this need and introduced a little over a year ago the Opswat Academy, which is an amazing set of modules. Almost all of them are free. If you take them, you can go to opswatacademy.com on our website. You can take them and be certified. So this is a certification that you can add to your portfolio for yourself for career development. I've taken it, Russ has taken it, as has most of the OPSWAT employees, and a testimonial that it is much less dry than most of the training that I've taken. I found it very educational and easy to do, so I encourage you to check that out. We would like to have you get started with us. We are offering you a single platform approach to address 2020's toughest cybersecurity issues. No one solution can do it all, but with OPSWAT, we can give you the education as I've just discussed. We can provide multiple forms of security protection for the defense and depth strategy required. We can enable continuous scans with either automated or self-remediation steps to stay in compliance. And we are enabling least privilege access to the network, data, and applications for much stronger defense. So if you are interested in what you've learned today, please reach out to us for a free consultation where we can review your security goals and issues and determine if OPSWAT can enable you to meet them. Or you can just jump right in. You can just use the link here to go to the OPSWAT portal where you can download MetaAccess with STP and use up to 50 licenses to manage the devices for an indefinite time period. You'll be able to see for yourself how powerful these tools are and yet how quickly they can be implemented and easily managed. Of course, we are happy to assist with any questions. And on that note, it is time for our Q&A, and I will pass this back to Doug. So Doug, back to you.
I was talking on mute. So thank you very much, Laura and Russ. So now we'll open up the webinar for Q&A. Please enter your questions using the questions tab of your Zoom console. If we're unable to answer your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up by email. So there are a few questions. The first question is, I see on your website that your customers can register for up to 50 free licenses. Is that available for me to offer as well?
It is available. This is something that we do offer for anyone, and all of you who are attending today will be able to log on and gain access to those licenses.
Excellent. Next question. Are you concerned that people have already put work from home solutions in place?
This is Laura, and I'll take this one as well. While I believe many of you have probably had to put work from home solutions in immediately, it is time now to evaluate once again what is best for the long term, for the long haul. Whether we find a vaccine soon and can go back to the workplace or not, I think many companies, and probably many of you on this call, have recognized that it is often an advantage to at least have part of the workforce be able to work from home. It can be a great cost savings. It can be a great productivity enhancement, as long as it is also secure, and that's where we can help.
Excellent. So the next question, can I use SDP to protect on-premise devices? And how will it darken applications on-prem?
I'll take this one, Laura. So yes,
Thanks.
absolutely. You can use SDP to protect applications on premise, and that's not just applications that live on premise and remotely access, but there's advantages to having SDP protect applications even when the users are on the premise, on the local area network, because a lot of times attacks do originate internally. And again, as we talked about earlier, one of the advantages of SDP is it can stop that east-west kind of infiltrations that happen. A lot of times they phish the credentials and then they attack going east and west, and SDP can help block those attacks. And was there a second part to that I missed?
Yeah, the second part of the question, how will it darken applications on premises?
Okay, so yeah, similarly to how it does it remotely, the application gateway would be between the local users on premise and where the applications live, so that just the traffic just needs to flow through the gateway the same way. So there's ways to, on an application service, ensure that the traffic only comes from the gateway, and therefore no traffic would go directly to the applications, and so the application gateway can drop any non-authorized traffic just as easily for on-premise users as for remote users.
Okay, we have time for one more question. How does vulnerability scanning work in MetaAccess? Will it replace other vulnerability scanners?
You want me to take this one, Laura?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, so we kind of tried to touch on this a bit earlier in the sense that there's this 20 plus MetaAccess engines that can scan files and so forth. You typically would still want your malware solution on the box, whether Windows Defender or whatever that might be, to be the general antivirus or malware application on the machine. But when it comes to, for example, moving a file across the perimeter, so to speak, like plugging in a USB and making sure that files that are moving in or out of the device have a little extra protection, that's where MetaDefender can help. So they plug in the USB, it can trigger the scan using those multiple engines to ensure that we're leveraging sort of that crowdsourced intelligence about whether or not that file is truly safe or not. So it's not necessarily going to replace it. You'll still want to run anti-malware and vulnerability software, but it adds that extra layer on top of it.
All right, so we are at the top of the hour, and if we are unable to answer your questions, we'll reply by email or respond to your question by email. And we would like to thank everyone for joining today's webinar, and we hope to see you at one of our next upcoming webinars. Thank you.